Rabosai. Tonight is the second day of the month of Av. Really, it's already the third day of the month of Av. But we are 7 days into Amud Yomi, and we are learning Pesachim Daf He Amud Aleph. We left off at the bottom of Daf Daled Amud Beis, where the Gemara was discussing a halacha with regards to how do we know what is going on with the Isurim of Chametz on Erev Pesach. The Torah had the Gemara had told us, bottom of Daled Amud Beis, says the Gemara that we have a statement that get in the place here. We'll go back just a drop before that. The Gemara had asked the question: how do we know that we are not allowed to eat chametz from midday on Erev Pesach? And the Gemara had quoted from Abaye. Pasuk says, that on the first day you have to cease from eating chametz. And then the Gemara asked the question, what do you mean on the first day? How do you know that means the day before? Maybe the first day would tell you that it starts from the night, that the night starts on the day with regards to the Issur of chametz. And then the Gemara says, no, because the Torah has already told us that so we said, no, how we don't need to teach us that chametz is also at night, because there is a juxtaposition between the destruction of sa'ar, of yeast, to achilas chametz, eating chametz, achilas chametz and achilas matzah, and eating chametz is juxtaposed to eating matzah. Now the Gemara is going to analyze this statement. It says the Gemara as follows: how do you know that there is a correlation, that there is a relationship between the mitzvah of getting rid of sa'ar, of yeast, la'achilas chametz, to the prohibition of eating chametz? Tichsev shivas yomim sa'ar lo yimatzeh bevatechem ki kol ochel machmeses v'nichrasa. For 7 days you are not supposed to find any leaven within your house. Anybody that eats chametz gets kares. That's limud number one, meaning that the time period of the Issur of achilas chametz is the same as the time period of not having chametz in your possession. And by achilas chametz and achilas matzah, and we know that the prohibition of eating chametz is connected to the mitzvah of achilas matzah, dichsev, because the pasuk tells us, "Kol ma'chametzes lo yisechelu, b'chol ma'shvesechem techlu matzos." You're not allowed to eat any chametz, any leavened stuff. In all of your dwellings, you should eat matzah. Uchsiv bei b'matzah, and the pasuk tells us with regards to matzah, be'erev techlu matzos, that you need to eat matzah at night, on the first night of Pesach, which means that on the first night of Pesach there is a mitzvah of eating matzah, and therefore there is a prohibition of eating chametz, and therefore there is a prohibition of owning chametz. And because all three of these things are juxtaposed to each other, that then tells us that ach bayom harishon does not mean at night. It means the day before. Ach bayom harishon must mean the 14th of the month of Nisan. Now the Gemara is going to challenge this limit. The Gemara is going to say, well, hold up a second. Ve'ema lerabos lel arba asar lebir. No. Let's go the other way. Maybe it means, remember, we're trying to prove that the mitzvah of getting rid of chametz begins at midday on Erev Pesach. But once you've already said, ach bayom harishon tashbisu sa'ar mi'atechem, that on the first day you have to cease from owning of chametz, maybe that means that the prohibition of chametz, of owning chametz, begins the night before. It begins already on the night of the 14th. Meaning, now that we've proven that it's not talking about the night of the 15th, maybe it's the night of the 14th. Maybe this includes the night of the 14th. Says the Gemara, no, it says bayom. It says bayom, meaning during the daytime. Well, how do you know that means midday? Maybe it means mitzafra, from the morning. It says the Gemara, ach chilek. When you have the word ach b'yom harishon, anytime, Rashi points out here, anytime that you have achin v'rakim, anytime that the Torah says the word ach, but, or rak, only, that tells you a miut. That tells you that we are minimizing the time period, meaning whatever you might have thought, whatever the most expansive time period must be, b'yom harishon, ach b'yom harishon, it definitely doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean, if it's b'yom, it definitely doesn't mean from the morning. It must mean from some other time period. In the Rabbi Yishmael Tana, in the base Medrash of Rabbi Yishmael, they taught it as follows. This is the limit of Rabbi Yishmael. So far, we've proven that it must be that there is a mitzvah to get rid of your chametz at some point on Yom Harishon, meaning the 14th of Nisan, and it's not from the morning, it is some point later on in the day. This limud hasn't yet taught us what time of day it is. It hasn't taught us chatzos. So that's important to keep in mind for the moment. But there is another limud that we're going to see more than that in a few moments. The Rabbi Shmuel, in the house of Rabbi Shmuel, they taught the following. They learned it differently. We have found that the 14th day of the month of Nisan is called Rishon. Shneimar barishon ba'arba asar yom lachodesh. At the beginning, or on the first, ba'arba asar yom lachodesh, the 14th day of the month. That's the pasuk in Shmos Yud Beis. Rav Nachman Yitzchak says, Rishon, the word Rishon, the mi'ikara mashma. What does the word Rishon mean? Rishon doesn't mean the first. Rishon means that which precedes. The Amakra, the pasuk says, Harishon Adam Tivaled, are you, Adam, created first? That's the pasuk in Eov. The context of the pasuk in Eov is that Eov is, the pasuk in Eov is saying, Harishon, the full pasuk, Harishon Adam Tivaled, is man created first, were you made before the hills? Meaning, we know that Adam Rishon was created on day 6, and the rest of the world was all created before Adam Rishon. That's the Mishnah Maseches Avos, that if a person does what they're supposed to be doing, so then the whole world is now justified because of mankind, and if they don't do what they're supposed to be doing, so then Chazal say that even the fly came before us. Meaning that the word Rishon does not necessarily mean the first, it just means that which precedes. It's also worth pointing out that the word achron doesn't mean the final or the last. Achron means that which is after or behind. And this was part of the vikuach between the Rambam and Pablo Cristiani when they argued that all of the prophecies of the Beis Hamikdash, of the redemption of the Jewish people, were already fulfilled in the second Beis Hamikdash, and that there would be no further geula after that, because the pasuk says in Zechariah, Gadol Yeh Habayis says ha'achron min harishon, that the second Beis Hamikdash, the achron would be more than the rishon. So they challenged the Ramban. They said to him, well, the achron means the last one. So the Ramban says no, because we know from the pasuk by Yaakov and Esav. So Yaakov splits his camp in two, and he has Leah and her children behind him. So the pasuk says, Leah ves yaladea achronim, ves Rachel v'yaladea achronim. He puts Leah and her children behind him, and Rachel and her children behind them. Meaning the word achron does not mean final, it does mean the last, it just means latter. So the same way, says the Gemara over here, the word rishon doesn't mean the first, it means that which precedes, the thing that comes before. So this is the limit that Rav Nachman Yitzchak says. Rishon the bi'ikara mashma. Rishon means the thing that comes first. The Amakra harishon adam tivale. Elameata says the Gemara lekachtem lachem b'yom harishon, when the Torah tells you that you need to take the arba minim on the yom harishon, on the first day. Hachinam rishon the bi'ikara mashma. Does that mean that you have to take lulav and esrog erev sukkos? That's not the halacha. So we said, no, shani hasam. It's different over there. In that pasuk dichsiv, usmachtem lifnei Hashem lekechem shivas yomim. You have to be happy in front of Hashem that the simcha of the lulav and esrog is for 7 days. So we know exactly when it begins, and we know when it ends. My shvi'i lechag, just like the 7th day is the 7th day of Sukkot. Av rishon lechag. So too, the rishon here is not talking about the preceding day; it's talking about the first day. Meaning, rishon could mean one of two things. It either means preceding or it means first. In this context, says the Gemara, it must mean first because we already know the time period that we're talking about. Smachtem lifnei Hashem lekechem shiv'as yomim. Says the Gemara, hachinam ksiv ach b'yom harishon tashbisu ach b'yom harishon tashbisu shiv'as yomim matzos teichelu. The pasuk here also gives us a time period that says on the Yom Harishon you have to get rid of your chametz, and then 7 days you have to eat matzahs. Does that mean that you have to get rid of your chametz on the first day of Pesach because we have this time period from day 1 into day 7? Says the Gemara, imkein nichtav kra rishon. No, then the Torah should have said rishon. Ach b'yom rishon tashbisu, on the day which is preceding. That would be Rishon. Ha-Rishon. What is the Rishon day? Lamali. Why do you need that to say Ha-Rishon? Shma mina lichta amran. It must be, as we have said, that B'yom Ha-Rishon is the day which precedes it. Meaning the extra hey tells you it's not a regular Rishon. It is, meaning it's not the day before. It is Ha-Rishon, the very first day. It's not B'yom Ha-Rishon. Ha-Rishon means the day that precedes, not B'yom Rishon, the first of the 7-day period. Says the Gemara, that doesn't work out consistently. But with regards to Sukkot, it also says Harishon. So does Harishon specifically mean the day before? Because if that would be true, we'd have to take a lot of Esrog the day before Sukkot. Why do you need it to say Harishon? It shouldn't have said that. And furthermore, there it says B'yom Harishon Shabbasan, B'yom Hashmini Shabbasan. On the first day, there is a Yom Tov. And on the 8th day, there is a Yom Tov, talking about Shmini Atzeres. Ema Rishon D'Mikar Mashma. Does that mean, in that context, that you keep a Yom Tov before the first day of Sukkot? That there's an Isur Malacha, there's a prohibition of doing Malacha the day before Sukkot starts? That doesn't make any sense. Shani Hasa, says the Gemara, that doesn't work. Well, why? There's different. Because the pasuk says V'yom Hashmini Shabbason, that on the 8th day there is also a Shabbason. On the first day there is a Shabbason, and on the 8th day, and those two things have to be congruent with each other. The Yom Harishon means the first of the 8th day period, and V'yom Hashmini means the 8th day of the 8th day period. Harishon could be the antecedent day, the preceding day. In theory, but not if it's juxtaposed to the word Hashmini. That certainly means the 8th day of the Yom Tov and only the 8th day. Ma Shmini Shmini l'Chag, Av Rishon Rishon l'Chag. Must be that the Shmini is talking about the 8th day of the Chag, and Rishon is talking about the first day of the Chag, regardless of the Ha. Says the Gemara, Ha Rishon Lamali. So why do you need to say Ha Rishon at all? Just say L'Kachtem Lechem B'Yom Rishon, and you could have said with regards to the Isur Malacha, B'yom Rishon Shabbason, B'yom Shmini Shabbason. Why do you need the Ha? Says the Gemara, to tell you that you don't have an Isur Malacha, meaning you don't have the same Isur Malacha, you don't have a Yom Tov during Chalamayid. Chalamayid, there is a heter of at least certain Malachas, that's Machlokas, in the Tanaim and the Amoraim, and the Rishonim, exactly what the din is of Chalamayid, but either which way, it's certainly not the same din as Yom Tov, and that is what the Torah is coming to tell you here, is that Harishon and Hashmini tells you not Chalash Mayid. Says the Gemara, Chalash Mayid mi Rishon Ushmini Nafka. Yeah, but what do you need to have for that? You would know that from just the word Rishon and the word Shmini. B'yom Rishon Shabbasan, u'b'yom Shmini Shabbasan. Why, now all of a sudden you're going to think that the intermediate days are also a Shabbason, are also a day of Isur Malacha? That doesn't make any sense. Says the Gemara, no, Itzrich, you do need it still to say this. I mean, I might have thought, since the Torah told you, B'yom Hashmini, since the Torah told you, Uvayom Hashmini, and on the 8th day, Vav Ma'isiv Al Rishon. Meaning there's an and the 8th day. So maybe it also meant the 7th day and also meant the 6th day. I feel that you would also have an Isur Malacha, and you also have to observe the Yom Tov for all 8 days of Sukkot, leading all the way up to Shmini Atzeres. Kamash Malan, that's not the case. So now the Gemara challenges this limit completely. So it says, okay, so if the Ha, B'yom Harishon, and B'yom Hashmini is coming to tell you, don't think Uvayom Hashmini tells you that all the days of Chalamayid have an Isur Malacha, says the Torah, says the Gemara, V'loy lichtav rachmana loy vav v'loy hey. Maybe we should avoid the word vav and we should avoid the word, the letter hey. You don't need a vav, you don't need a hey. What do you need any of these things for? It could simply have said, B'yom Rishon Shabbason, B'yom Shmini Shabbason. You don't need the hey, you don't need the vav. V'su, and furthermore, Hasam Dichsiv, there it says, B'yom Harishon Mikra Kodesh, on the first day. There is a Mikra Kodesh, there is a Yom Tov. Yelachem, it will be for you. Rishon the Mikara Mashma. Well, now you're going to tell me that in that context, Rishon, Harishon is going to tell me that there is a day before that you also have to observe Yom Tov. Says the Gemara, rather, we learn nothing from these Rishons, Harishons. None of this is to make drushes of when there is a Isur Malacha, when there is a day of bringing of Lulav and Esrog, and not to tell you that there is a day of the burning of chametz before it. I mean, we don't learn any of that from this relationship of Rishon and Harishon. Ela hani shloisha Rishon, these three things that we say Rishon, mibayle lichdetanya debei Rabbi Yishmael. Really, the limit from the house of Rabbi Yishmael, meaning which is where we came from at the beginning of this, where the Gemara had said all the way towards the top of the Amud, that debei Rabbi Yishmael Tana Matzino Arba Asar Shnika Rishon Shenema Berishon Ba'arba Asar Yom Nachodesh. We find that the first that the day before Pesach is called a Rishon, Ba'arba Asar Yom Nachodesh, the 14th day of the month. That's called a Rishon. So there, Rav Nachman Yitzchak wanted to tell us maybe we were learning from the house of Rabbi Yishmael that the Rishon is going to teach you the din of chametz and Erev Pesach. Says the Gemara, no, that was never the limud that Rabbi Yishmael was teaching us. He wasn't telling us a drasha in halacha. He was telling us a drasha in agarata. Says the Gemara, Elahani Shlosh Rishon Mibaile. What are the three times that the pasuk says Rishon, teaching us with regards to the Yom Tovim? B'yom Harishon, Uvayom Harishon, and B'yom Harishon. What does it mean? This is the limit that came from the house of Rabbi Shmuel. The Tana Debei Rabbi Shmuel, we learn from the house of Rabbi Shmuel, Bischar Shlosh Rishon, Zachar Shlosh Rishon, in the merit of 3 Rishons that we keep Yom Tov, where Rishon is said 3 times. We have the schus of 3 things being Rishon as well. What else is Rishon? La'achris Zara Shel Esav, to destroy the descendants of Esav, Levinyan Beis Hamikdash, to building the Beis Hamikdash, Ulishmai Shel Mashiach, and to merit the name of Mashiach. How do we know that these things have to do with Rishon at all? Because all of these things are called a Rishon. La'achris Zara Shel Esav, to destroy the remnants, the descendants of Esav, who've been trying to kill us since the days of Yaakov and Esav. Says the pasuk, T'chsiv vayetze harishon admoni, that the first one, the Rishon, came at Admoni, all red, kuloi ka'ader se'ar, all hairy, and that was the Rishon that of Esav. And the Rishon of Yaakov is to undo that. The Rishon of the mitzvah is to undo the Rishon of Esav. Ulevinya Beis Hamikdash, and to the building of the Beis Hamikdash. Dirshu, because the pasuk says, Kisei covered morim merishon mekom mikdash. The pasuk in Yirmiyahu, that Kisei covered morim merishon mekom mikdash, that the house, that the throne of Hashem on high is Merishon, from originally, from the beginning. That is Mekom Mikdashen, that's the place of the Beis Hamikdash. Ulishmai Shel Mashiach, and to the name of Mashiach Dichsev, Rishon Letzion Hinei Hinam, the pasuk in Yeshaya. Behold, that's Hinei Hinam, right? There's somebody, the first one that comes to Tzion, that's going to be Mashiach Tzidkenu, Hinei Hinam. Here he is. Here he is coming. That's the name of Mashiach, to be able to recognize Mashiach. The Eish Kodesh points out in one of the drashas in Derech HaMelech that this whole limud of Rabbi Shmuel, the house of Rabbi Shmuel, is teaching us that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is telling us that there are 2 kinds of Rishon. That's what we originally learned. There's a Rishon that is the first, and there's a Rishon that happens to come before. And what the Torah is telling us is to set our priorities straight. Not simply to say that which comes before is the most important thing. It's not to say, okay, whatever thing, first in, first out. The first thing that I have to deal with is the first thing that shows up on my plate. That's not true. It's all a question of priorities. The fact that Esav was born first doesn't mean that Esav is the most important. It tells us that Esav happened to come first, but he's not the Rishon. He happens to be the Rishon of the thing that came first, but it's not the Rishon in terms of priorities. And therefore, by keeping Yom Tov, we are putting our priorities in place. That is the avoda of the Rishon of the Yom Tovim. Nevertheless, that whole limit of Rishon and Harishon does not tell us that there is a prohibition of chametz, or a mitzvah of getting rid of chametz on Erev Pesach, and a prohibition of owning chametz on Erev Pesach. That we had learned from before. And there is another limit that we are going to learn from here. Rava Amar Rava tells us mehacha, that it comes from this pasuk. The pasuk tells us lo sishchat al chametz dam zivchi. One is not allowed to shecht the korban Pesach while there is chametz around. Lo tishchat ha-pesach va'adayin chametz kaim. Don't shecht the korban Pesach while you still have chametz around. You have to get rid of your chametz beforehand. I ve'ema, and maybe you would say kol chad v'chad ki shochet zman shchita. No, maybe that pasuk is telling you that everybody is obligated to get rid of their chametz when they shecht their korban Pesach. Who tells you that is a chiyuv of getting rid of the chametz for everybody at the same time? Says the Gemara, Zman shchita amar Rachmana. No, Zman shchita amar Rachmana, lo tishchat al chametz dam zivchi. It's not talking about you, it's talking about the you collectively. In general, when Klal Yisrael is told, don't shecht the korban Pesach while you still own chametz, that is talking about everybody. And Rava has a brisa that is going to support him. The brisa tells us as follows: on the first day, you are going to get rid of the chametz from your house. Me'erev Yom Tov. That's what the brisa says. The brisa learns ach b'yom rishon simply means from erev Yom Tov. Oy eina ela b'yom Tov atzma. Maybe it means on Yom Tov itself. Talmud loymar, but the pasuk comes to tell us lo sishchat al chametz dam zivchi. When the pasuk tells us don't shecht the chametz, don't shecht the korban Pesach while there is chametz. You can't shecht chametz, right? Don't shecht the korban Pesach while there is chametz around. The real brisa of Rabbi Shmuel that taught us any limud with regards to this pasuk goes together with the pasuk the Rava had told us. You need these 2 psukim together, ach b'yom rishon, tashbisu sa'arim v'atechem, together with lo sishchat al chametz dam zivchi, to tell you that the Yom Rishon is the 14th of Nisan, and that there is a chiyuv of hashbasa, of getting rid of the chametz. Then, Why? Because you cannot check the Korban Pesach while you still have chametz around. Rabbi Akiva has a different limud. Rabbi Akiva says that is not necessary. Harehu Omer, because the pasuk tells us, meaning you don't need those limudim. The pasuk tells us on the first day you're going to get rid of chametz from your house. And the pasuk says kol malacha la yisasu, that you're not allowed to do malacha. Pasuk says that you have to destroy your chametz, and the pasuk says that on the first day of Yom Tov you have to keep Yom Tov. Destroying chametz would be a malacha, so it cannot be telling you that you have an obligation to violate Yom Tov. It cannot be that the Torah is telling you to violate Yom Tov. So it must be that it's telling you that you have to destroy your chametz the day before. That's the Yom Harishon. Don't violate Yom Tov. That is the limit of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Yossi is going to tell you as follows: you don't need the limit not of Rabbi Yishmael and not of Rabbi Akiva. I have a different limit. He says, the pasuk says, the Yom Harishon tells us that we have to get rid of the chametz from our homes. Me'erev Yom Tov. This means me'erev Yom Tov, or does it mean on Yom Tov itself? The pasuk says, but that is chilek. That is dividing. It tells you a limitation. And if this was telling you that you had to get rid of your chametz on Yom Tov itself, mishari, since when is there any permissibility of having chametz on Yom Tov itself? Meaning, once the word ach is telling you that there is a limitation on that day, meaning there are some parts of the day that you can have chametz and some parts that you cannot have chametz, so then it's impossible to say that that means on Pesach day itself. There is a juxtaposition between hashbasas sa'ar, between the destruction of yeast la'achilas chametz, to the eating of chametz, v'achilas chametz la'achilas matzah. We know that there is a juxtaposition between achilas chametz and achilas matzah. That all of these things are juxtaposed together, and therefore there is no permissibility of ever eating chametz on Pesach, and therefore there is no permissibility of owning chametz on Pesach itself. So the day Yom Harishon must be talking about the day before, and then Rav is going to come along and tell us from the Brayso of Rabbi Akiva we are going to learn 3 separate dinim. But before we get there, and that'll be tomorrow, Be'ez Hashem Yisbarach at 6:15 a.m. Looking forward to seeing everybody there. But it's kedai to understand that the day that this whole discussion of when does the isur of chametz kick in, and when do you have to destroy your chametz? This entire discussion seems to be a little bit ridiculous. Why? What do you mean? Like, what did they do the year before? They had this whole limit. Like, we're only learning this now. So to this end, it's important to point out the discussion. The Gemara writes that many times in Shas, the Gemara will ask a question in halacha that we know the answer to. We know that it's asur. We know that it's asur to eat chametz after the 6th hour of the day on Erev Pesach. We know that it's asur to own chametz, and that was the discussion between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. What exactly is the time, Rabbi Akiva? What exactly the time of day is that you have to burn the chametz, and what you have to do bittul chametz, and when we're going to create the buffer zone beforehand. And we'll get to many of those halachas in greater detail in the up and coming dapim and amudim. But sometimes the Gemara wants to know. Okay, we know what the halacha is, and we know that the psukim say, but we don't know how the psukim tie to the halacha. We know what the Torah Shebechsav says, and we know what the Torah Shebal Peh says, and we're trying to figure out what is the relationship between these two things. We're trying to figure out what the limit is, because sometimes there's nafkaminas halacha, and sometimes it's just for the veracity of understanding the relationship between the dinim deraisa and the dinim deraisa Torah Shebechsav and the dinim deraisa of the Torah Shebal Peh. So, for example, it says the Maseches that when the pasuk says that you have to take on the first day of Sukkot a priyat hadar, the fruit of a beautiful tree, and the Gemara in Sukkot spends a tremendous amount of time figuring out how do you know that that means an esrog. So we always knew that it was an esrog. We just didn't know how we learned it from the pasuk, or there were different traditions how we learned it from the pasuk. All of them being valid. And because we are learning them from these limudim, therefore there is what that we can learn in addition to it. And that's the exercise that the Gemara is going through. It's not that we were mesupek, we weren't sure when the Isur Chametz kicked in, or whether or not that was true or relevant. Of course it's true, of course it's relevant. We are just understanding from the different Tanaim how exactly all of this works. Be'ez Hashem Yisbarach, looking forward to seeing everybody tomorrow morning. Have yourself a marvelous day, a marvelous evening. We'll see you later. Later tov.